March 16th, 1968, 11:07 a.m. Washington, D.C. The ballroom at the old Senate office building is thick with heat and camera lights. Reporters press shoulder to shoulder, their notebooks already open, pens hovering like bayonets before a charge. Flashbulbs crack. Television cables snake across polished floors. The air smells of wool suits, cigarette smoke, and expectation. Then the doors open. Senator Robert F. Kennedy steps forward. Dark suit crisp, eyes heavy with calculation. He moves slowly, deliberately, past a wall of microphones bearing the logos of CBS, NBC, ABC. Every camera turns toward him like artillery tracking a single target. Outside, sirens echo faintly across Capitol Hill. Inside, the room goes still. Kennedy clears his throat. The country has been bleeding for years. Vietnam, riots, assassinations, campuses on fire, and everyone knows this moment is about more than a campaign. It is a direct challenge, not just to the war, to a sitting president. Back at the White House, the televisions are already on. In the Oval Office, Lyndon Baines Johnson sits behind the resolute desk, shoulders hunched, tie loosened. The room is dim except for the glow of a small television set perched on a cabinet. Staffers hover near the walls. Joseph Califano, George Christian, a few others. Silent, watchful. Johnson doesn't speak. He just stays at the screen. Kennedy's voice comes through the speaker, calm, deliberate, unmistakably firm. He talks about the war, about division, about a nation losing faith in its leaders. He never says Johnson's name, but every sentence lands like artillery on the president's desk. You can almost feel the tension in the room, the tick of a clock, the hum of air conditioning, the faint rustle of papers as an aide shifts uneasily. Johnson leans forward, elbows on his knees. His face tightens. He's been expecting this for weeks, maybe months. But expectation doesn't soften the blow. Robert Kennedy, brother of a man whose legacy still hangs over American politics like a ghost, has now stepped into the ring. And it isn't just politics. It's personal. Johnson remembers Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. The chaos, the oath of office aboard Air Force One. Jackie Kennedy still in her bloodstained suit. He remembers the distrust from the Kennedy family, the quiet resentment, the feeling that he was an outsider who inherited a throne never meant for him. Now that same family name is back, challenging him directly in the middle of a war. On the television, RFK continues. He speaks of young men dying overseas, of cities burning at home, of a moral crisis. His words are measured, but the subtext is sharp. America needs new leadership. Johnson exhales slowly, a long breath. Someone in the room coughs. No one days interrupt. What the hell is he doing? One aide whispers under his breath, barely audible. Johnson doesn't answer. Not yet. He watches Kennedy finish his remarks, step away from the microphones, and disappear into a storm of reporters shouting questions. Flashbulbs explode like distant artillery fire. The screen fills with chaos. Commentary begins instantly, anchors already calling it one of the most dramatic political challenges in modern history. And then Johnson finally speaks. Low, controlled, almost too quiet to hear. Well, there it is. The room shifts. Staffers exchange glances. They know that tone. It's the calm before a storm. Johnson pushes himself up from his chair, towering over everyone around him. He begins pacing. Slow, deliberate steps across the carpet, hands clasped behind his back like a general studying a battlefield map. After everything, he mutters, after everything we've done. He turns toward the television again, eyes narrowed. His mind is already racing. Vietnam troop levels, the rising anti-war movement, Senator Eugene McCarthy's surprising strength in New Hampshire just days earlier. The Democratic Party is fracturing in real time. And now Robert Kennedy has chosen his moment to strike. An aide finally gathers the nerve to ask, Mr. President, what do you want to do? Johnson stops pacing. For a moment, the room is silent except for the television commentary. He looks at the faces around him, loyalists, strategists, men who have followed him through the brutal machinery of power. Then he says something that freezes the room. Because it isn't just a political reaction. It's personal, raw, and it reveals exactly how deeply this challenge is cut. But the words he chooses, and the strategy that begins forming in that moment, will set off a chain of events no one in the room can fully see yet, a chain that will lead to one of the most shocking decisions ever made by a sitting president. And by the end of the month, the entire nation will be watching in disbelief. The television clicks off with a dull snap. The room exhales, but Lyndon Johnson doesn't. He stands motionless for a moment, staring at the blank screen as if RFK's image might reappear and take the words back. It doesn't. Johnson turns slowly toward his staff. His face is tight, jaw working. He is a towering figure physically, but now the weight he carries is political and deeply personal. "You boys know what this is," he finally says, voice low but cutting through the room. "This isn't about the country. This is about Bobby Kennedy trying to finish what his family started." No one interrupts. Not one pen moves. Johnson walks to the windows overlooking the South Lawn. Outside, tourists wonder, unaware that the Democratic Party is fracturing inside these walls. Helicopter blades thump faintly in the distance, routine flights that now sound like war drums. He remembers years of tension with the Kennedy family. The 1960 campaign when John F. Kennedy chose him as vice president, less an embrace than a political necessity. The quiet condescension from RFK during cabinet meetings after the assassination. The whispers that Johnson was an accidental president. And now RFK has stepped forward, challenging him while American soldiers are dying daily in Vietnam. Johnson turns back to his aides, anger rising. "After everything we've passed, civil rights, voting rights, Medicare, this is the thanks I get." His voice cracks just slightly, not with weakness, but with exhaustion. George Christian shifts uncomfortably. Another aide scribbles notes, unsure whether he is documenting history or a private storm. Then Johnson says a line many in the room will never forget. "Well, Bobby just handed the Republicans the White House." The words land heavy, not shouted, not dramatic, just bitterly certain. He starts pacing again, faster now. Each step thuds against the carpet like boots on a war room floor. "He thinks he can ride his brother's ghost straight into this office," Johnson mutters, "but is going to tear the party apart doing it." You can almost feel the pressure building, the Vietnam War escalating, anti-war protests growing louder, Eugene McCarthy already weakening Johnson's political armor after New Hampshire. And now RFK has opened a second front. Two challengers, one exhausted president. Joseph Califano tries to pivot toward strategy. "Sir, we can frame this as division during wartime. Loyalty, stability. You're still the commander-in-chief." Johnson waves him off, but is listening. Always listening. Even when angry, his political instincts never shut down. "What's the polling say this morning?" he asks suddenly. Numbers are read aloud. Approval ratings slipping. Trust in government eroding. College campuses boiling with protest. Each statistic feels like another artillery round landing closer to the Oval Office. Johnson sits heavily behind his desk, fingers drumming against a stack of briefing papers. He isn't just angry at RFK. He's tired. Bone-deep tired. Nights filled with casualty reports from Vietnam. Mornings consumed by protests and criticism. Every decision dissected by a nation that once trusted him. And yet, there's still a flicker of defiance. "We're not rolling over," he says, voice regaining steel. "You tell the party leadership we're staying in this fight." The staff nod, relieved to hear clarity, even if it sounds like the opening of a political war. Phone lines light up almost immediately. Governors call. Senators demand reassurance. Journalists circle like aircraft over a battlefield. Inside the White House, strategy sessions begin forming in overlapping waves. Communications teams drafting statements, campaign advisors calculating delegate counts, military briefings squeezed between political meetings. But beneath the motion, something deeper has shifted. Late that evening, Johnson sits alone in the Oval Office. The room is quieter now, just a ticking clock and distant footsteps in the hallway. A stack of letters from American families lies open on his desk. Parents of soldiers, widows, protesters, supporters. Each one a reminder of the burden he carries. He reads a casualty report from Vietnam. The numbers blur together. He sets the paper down and rubs his eyes. You can almost feel the silence pressing in. RFK's announcement wasn't just another political move. It forced Johnson to confront a brutal question. Is he still leading the nation, or merely fighting to hold on to power while it slips through his fingers? Outside, reporters speculate about a brutal Democratic primary battle. Inside, Johnson stares at the presidential seal on his carpet, lost in thought. The defiance from earlier has faded into something more complicated, doubt mixed with stubborn pride. Because even as he vows to fight, a different possibility has begun whispering at the edges of his mind. What if the fight itself is destroying him and the country? Within 2 weeks, Johnson will face a decision that no sitting president has made in over a century. And the pressure building tonight, fueled by RFK's challenge, will push him toward a moment that will shock allies, enemies, and the entire world. March 20th, 1968, 2:14 a.m., the White House residence. The lights are still on. Lyndon Johnson sits at a small desk upstairs, far from the ceremonial power of the Oval Office. His tie is gone, shirt sleeves rolled. A yellow legal pad covered in thick black handwriting lies in front of him. Numbers, names, political calculations scrawled like battlefield notes. A television murmurs softly in the corner, replaying footage from Vietnam. Helicopters lifting off under fire, Marines trudging through mud, body count scrolling across the screen like a grim scoreboard. He hasn't slept more than a few hours in days. Downstairs, staffers move through the West Wing with the quiet urgency of a command center under siege. Phones ring constantly. Posters arrive before sunrise. Campaign advisors debate strategy in hushed but heated tones. The Democratic Party is fracturing, and everyone feels it. RFK's announcement has electrified the anti-war movement. College campuses erupt into rallies. Protesters chant outside federal buildings. Newspapers run headlines questioning Johnson's leadership. Eugene McCarthy continues drawing young voters who once formed the backbone of the president's coalition. Johnson flips through a stack of memos. One line catches his eye. Support among young Democrats continues to erode. Another, delegates increasingly uncertain. He exhales sharply. "Goddamn," he mutters to himself. You can almost hear the echo of voices from earlier meetings. Senators warning of a contested convention, governors hedging their loyalty, donors quietly exploring alternatives. The president who once commanded Congress with unmatched political muscle now finds allies slipping through his fingers like sand. Later that morning, the cabinet room fills with smoke and tension. Advisors gather around the long table. Clark Clifford, Dean Rusk, Walt Rostow, faces drawn, eyes tired. Vietnam dominates the discussion. Troop levels, negotiations, public trust collapsing faster than anyone predicted. Johnson leans forward, voice rough. "Every decision we make over there," he says, tapping a map of Southeast Asia, "comes back here. Every body bag, every protest sign, every goddamn headline." No one disagrees. Clark Clifford speaks carefully. "Mr. President, the political cost is becoming unsustainable." The words hang in the air like a slow-falling shell. Johnson nods, but his expression hardens. "I didn't send those boys to Vietnam to lose," he says. "And I'm not going to abandon them just because Bobby Kennedy wants to run for president." Yet even as he says it, the weight shows in his eyes. That evening, Johnson calls in a smaller circle, his most trusted political advisors. The mood is different now, less defiant, more analytical. Polling maps spread across the table like military intelligence reports. States once considered safe now flicker uncertainly. What happens if this turns into a three-way bloodbath? One aide asks quietly. "McCarthy, Kennedy, and you." Johnson stares at the map without answering. He knows the answer. A fractured Democratic Party could hand victory to the Republicans in November. His earlier words echo back to him. Bobby just handed the Republicans the White House. But now the realization cuts deeper. Maybe the battle itself is unwinnable. That night, alone again, Johnson replays RFK's announcement in his mind. Not just a challenge, but the tone. Calm, measured, confident. The image of a younger, energized figure promising change while Johnson shoulders a burden of war and unrest. He picks up another stack of letters from Americans, some begging him to end the war, others urging him to stay strong. One letter from a soldier's mother stops him cold. Her son killed near Khe Sanh. Her grief written in shaky handwriting. She thanks the president for his service and asks when the fighting will end. Johnson sets the letter down slowly. You can almost feel the shift happening, not sudden, not dramatic, but steady and irreversible. The defiance that fueled his first reaction to RFK's candidacy is beginning to erode under exhaustion, pressure, and the relentless arithmetic of politics and war. In the days that follow, a new kind of meeting begins appearing on the schedule. Small, private, often late at night. Discussions not about how to win, but whether to run at all. The idea is unthinkable to many around him. Presidents don't walk away from power, especially not in the middle of a war. But Johnson starts asking quiet questions. What would happen to the country if the Democratic Party tears itself apart? Would stepping aside unify it, or destroy his legacy? Outside the White House gates, protesters chant loud every day. Inside, the president who once thrived on political combat begins considering an option no one saw coming. And within 10 days, he will sit before television cameras, not to attack Robert Kennedy, not to rally voters, but to deliver a message that will stun the nation and redefine the meaning of presidential power. March 31st, 1968, 8:47 p.m. The White House broadcast room. Technicians adjust heavy studio lights that cast sharp shadows across a simple wooden desk. A single camera sits on a tripod, its lens dark and unblinking. Wires coil across the floor like trenches waiting to be crossed. Lyndon Baines Johnson stands just outside the frame, suit jacket buttoned, shoulders squared, but his eyes are tired. A producer raises a hand. 13 minutes, Mr. President. In living rooms across America, televisions hum to life. Families gather after dinner. Soldiers in Vietnam lean toward small screens in mess halls. College students watch from crowded dorm lounges, some curious, some angry, all expecting another speech about war strategy or national unity. No one expects what's coming. Johnson sits down, papers arranged carefully before him. He adjusts his glasses, glances briefly at the clock on the wall, 8:59 p.m., and exhales slowly. For weeks, RFK's announcement has echoed in his mind, not as a single moment, but as a catalyst that forced him to confront everything: Vietnam, division, exhaustion, and the growing realization that his presence in the race may be tearing his own party apart. The red light on the camera flicks on. "Good evening, my fellow Americans," he begins, voice steady but heavy with gravity. He speaks first about Vietnam, bombing pauses, negotiations, the hope for peace. Maps and casualty reports sit just beyond the frame, silent reminders of the war that has defined his presidency. You can almost feel viewers settling in, expecting familiar rhetoric. But then the tone shifts. Johnson's voice slows. His words become more deliberate. He speaks about the nation's divisions, the anger on the streets, the distrust in government. He speaks about unity, not as a political slogan, but as a desperate necessity. Behind the camera, aides exchange nervous glances. They've seen drafts of the speech, but even they don't know how it will land with the public. And then Johnson reaches a final paragraph. He looks directly into the lens, eyes unwavering. "I shall not seek," he says, pausing just long enough for the words to hang in the air, "and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president." For a split second, the nation freezes. In newsrooms, journalists stare at their monitors in disbelief. In living rooms, folks stop halfway to mouths. Soldiers in Vietnam look at one another, unsure they heard correctly. College campuses erupt with shouts, some triumphant, some stunned into silence. Inside the White House, staff members who have served Johnson for years stand motionless, absorbing the reality of what just happened. A president, one of the most powerful political operators in modern history, has voluntarily stepped away from re-election. The camera light goes dark. The speech is over. Johnson removes his glasses and sets them on the desk. He doesn't smile. He doesn't celebrate. He simply sits there for a moment, as if the weight of years has finally shifted off his shoulders. Outside the gates, reporters sprint toward payphones to file breaking stories. Networks interrupt regular programming with urgent bulletins. Political allies scramble to recalibrate strategies. Opponents tried to process a race suddenly without the incumbent president. And Robert F. Kennedy, whose announcement helped trigger this chain of events, finds himself in a political landscape completely transformed. What began as a challenge to a sitting president has now opened the field entirely. But Johnson's decision isn't just about politics. It's about legacy, about exhaustion, about a man who spent years wielding power with unmatched force finally choosing to relinquish it in the face of a nation in turmoil. Later that night, Johnson walks alone through the quiet halls of the White House. Portraits of past presidents line the walls, men who fought wars, faced crises, and carried the same impossible burden. He pauses briefly in the Oval Office doorway, looking at the desk where he watched RFK's announcement just weeks earlier. You can almost feel the echo of that moment, the anger, the resentment, the realization that the political fight ahead might consume everything he had left to give. Now the fight is over, at least for him. But the story isn't finished, because just 2 months later, tragedy will strike again, an event that will shock the nation even more than Johnson's withdrawal and reshape the 1968 election in ways no one could have predicted. And as the campaign season intensifies without him, Johnson will watch from the sidelines, grappling with whether stepping aside saved the country or left it even more vulnerable to chaos. June 5, 1968, 12:15 a.m. The Ambassador Hotel, Los Angeles. The ballroom is alive with cheers, camera flashes, and the restless energy of a campaign surging forward. Robert F. Kennedy stands at the podium, sweat on his brow, eyes shining beneath the bright television lights. Supporters wave signs, chant his name, and push closer to the stage. The California primary has just been called in his favor. Momentum, real, undeniable momentum, is finally his. He smiles. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, there's a sense that history is bending toward him. My thanks to all of you, he says into a wall of microphones. Now it's on to Chicago, and let's win there. Applause explodes. Confetti drifts through the air like falling ash. Reporters shout questions. Photographers push forward, and campaign aides gesture urgently toward an exit route through the hotel kitchen. Faster, safer, less crowded. You can almost feel the exhaustion beneath the celebration. The long months of rallies, debates, and relentless travel. The shadow of Lyndon Johnson's withdrawal from the race, a moment that transformed Kennedy from challenger to frontrunner, still hangs over the campaign like an unfinished sentence. Kennedy steps down from the podium, shaking hands as he moves toward a side door. A line of busboys and kitchen staff stand watching in disbelief as the senator passes through narrow hallways lined with stainless steel counters and stacks of plates. The cheers from the ballroom fade into distant echoes. And then, chaos. Shots crack through the air. Sharp, sudden, confusing. People scream. Dishes shatter. Bodies drop to the floor. Campaign aides scramble, some diving toward Kennedy, others pulling bystanders to safety. In seconds, the jubilant victory turns into a scene of horror. You can almost hear the ringing silence that follows, the stunned disbelief of witnesses trying to understand what just happened. News spreads with terrifying speed. Back in Washington, the White House is quiet when the first call comes through. Lyndon Johnson has already stepped away from the campaign trail, retreating into the duties of the presidency while watching the political storm unfold from a distance. A staff member knocks urgently on his door. "Mr. President, there's been a shooting. Senator Kennedy's been hit." Johnson sits up slowly, eyes narrowing as the words sink in. The television flickers on again. Grainy footage, confused reporters, conflicting details pouring in by the minute. The same man whose announcement months earlier had triggered Johnson's decision to withdraw is now fighting for his life. The president leans forward, hands clasped. No anger now, no rivalry, just shock. He watches as anchors struggle to maintain composure, as crowds gather outside hospitals, as the country holds its breath once more, reliving the trauma of another political assassination just 5 years after Dallas. Johnson makes calls, security briefings, offers of federal assistance, messages of support to the Kennedy family. The rivalry that once defined their relationship fades in the face of national tragedy. Hours pass. Doctors fight to save Robert Kennedy's life, but the damage is catastrophic. On June 6, the announcement comes, RFK is dead. Across the nation, grief spreads like wildfire. Churches fill with mourners. Protesters and supporters alike fall silent. Campaign signs become memorials. The 1968 election, already the most turbulent in modern history, now feels cursed by violence and loss. Johnson watches a funeral procession days later from Texas, his face drawn and reflective. He sees crowds lining the railroad tracks, weeping as a train carrying Kennedy's body moves slowly toward Washington. The same family that once resented him, the same man whose candidacy forced him to step aside, now gone forever. You can almost feel the weight of regret and reflection pressing in. What would have happened if Johnson had stayed in the race? Would the path of history have changed? Would Kennedy have survived? These questions hang unanswered, drifting through the national consciousness like ghosts. And as the Democratic Party staggers toward a convention defined by chaos, protest, and division, Johnson's earlier words echo with eerie clarity. This fight could tear the country apart. The president who once dominated Washington now watches from the sidelines as a political world reshapes itself without him, a silent witness to a campaign that began with a single announcement and ended in tragedy that changed America forever.